All right. So today we're tackling this mountain of Sam Altman stuff.
Yeah.
Interviews, talks, like you handed us everything but the man's grocery list.
Right.
Which tells me you are really trying to like get inside the head of the guy driving this whole AI explosion right now.
Yeah, it seems like it. And there's a lot there.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is really interesting is how often he compares this moment in AI to the early days of the internet.
He does, doesn't he?
Yeah.
But it's not just a cute comparison, is it?
No.
He's actually saying, like, this could be even bigger.
Exactly. And he gives some pretty good reasons for thinking that.
Right.
One thing is just the sheer speed of what we're seeing right now in terms of progress. So like GPT-4, which obviously you've been using a bunch of.
Yeah.
Imagine something significantly more capable than that. That's GPT-5. He says that's right around the corner.
Okay.
And then he says, and GPT-6 will make GPT-5 look like child's play.
Wow.
So that's the kind of like exponential growth he's talking about. And that's like really central to his view of the future.
So, okay, let's unpack that a little bit. Like, what makes GPT-5 so different? What actually changes?
So one of the things he talks about is the ability of these models to tackle increasingly complex tasks with less and less human input.
Okay.
He gives the example of computer programmers. And he's like, look, they're already seeing productivity gains of like 2 to 3x with AI assistants.
Wow.
He thinks that could go to 20 or 30x.
20 to 30 times.
Yeah.
That's wild. But he's not just talking about coders, right?
No, not at all.
No.
He sees that kind of productivity boost across the board.
Across every field.
From scientific research to creative fields, even education.
Interesting.
So it's a pretty radical shift in how we think about work and what humans can do.
So this idea of this exponential growth in AI capability leading to this massive productivity boom, it all sounds very utopian.
Well,
does he not get into the weeds about the challenges?
Oh, he does. He doesn't shy away from the challenges at all.
Okay.
He acknowledges that this level of change obviously comes with its own risks.
Yep.
He talks a lot about this idea of iterative deployment, so like gradually rolling out these technologies as opposed to...
They're just like flipping a switch and letting the superintelligence loose.
Exactly, and seeing how it interacts with the real world, gathering feedback and kind of adjusting course as we go.
So how do you even gather feedback on something as complicated and as potentially powerful as this new AI?
Yeah, that's the billion-dollar question, right? And it's something that he admits is really hard. He talks about the need for these really open lines of communication between AI developers, like the people at OpenAI, policymakers, and the public. And he seems to envision this process where you're introducing these technologies maybe in stages.
Okay.
And you're really taking the time to identify and then hopefully mitigate any potential problems before they become too widespread.
So that's the iterative part. But what about this idea of aligning these incredibly powerful AIs with, like, you know, human values?
Well, that's the even bigger question, isn't it? And to be fair to him, he's not pretending to have all the answers.
Right.
He says this is something that they're really wrestling with at OpenAI.
Yeah.
Like, how do you even define something as complex as human values? And then how do you embed that into a system?
Right.
And then, like, who even gets to decide what those values should be?
It's very complicated.
Yeah, huge questions.
And what I find fascinating that while he talks a lot about these large language models like GPT, he also hints that we're going to need entirely new paradigms to get to what he calls AGI, or artificial general intelligence.
Now, that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
He's like, we need to go beyond AI that just processes language to AI, that can generate new knowledge, AI, that can reason more like humans do, and even potentially accelerate scientific discovery in ways we can't even imagine yet.
So AI moving from a tool to a collaborator, or maybe even a co-creator at some point.
Potentially, yeah.
Does he think we should just sit back and let it happen?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
He really emphasizes this idea of resilience and adaptability for individuals. He's a big believer in lifelong learning, constantly kind of updating your skills, being open to new ways of thinking and working. It's about not just reacting to it, but like getting ahead of it and being ready.
Which makes me think about something else that you highlighted from the materials. This real focus on startups in this whole AI revolution.
Yeah.
Why does he think they're so important?
Well, he really sees startups as the engines of innovation here, especially when it comes to AI.
Okay.
He argues that they just have this speed and agility advantage compared to these bigger companies, right?
Right.
So they can move faster, take more risks, and ultimately kind of drive progress more quickly, but...
He doesn't think it's just like a free-for-all, build it and they will come kind of thing?
Not at all.
He has some pretty strong advice for those entrepreneurs, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. He really stresses the importance of building enduring businesses with clear value propositions.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that amidst all this excitement about AI, it's still about solving real problems for people.
All right, it's not just chasing hype cycles.
Right.
And, it's interesting because for all the talk about AI disrupting work, he also seems to believe in its potential to create a lot of new opportunities.
He does.
And not just for tech workers.
No, he talks about how AI could actually empower entrepreneurs all over the world.
Interesting.
Right, so potentially kind of leveling the playing field for folks in emerging markets who maybe haven't had access to the same resources before.
So it's not just shifting jobs around, it's potentially creating entirely new avenues for wealth creation.
Exactly.
And innovation in places that have kind of been left behind.
Yeah, he sees it as a chance to build a more equitable and inclusive global economy.
Wow.
Powered by AI and driven by, human ingenuity.
But he's not wearing rose-colored glasses here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of anxiety out there about AI taking over jobs, widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots. What's his response to that?
He addresses it head on. I mean, he acknowledges that AI could make those problems worse if we're not careful. And that's why he's such a big advocate for things like universal basic income as a way to kind of provide a safety net for those who might be displaced by automation.
Okay, so that's one potential solution.
Yeah.
But what about education? How do we prepare people for jobs that don't even exist yet?
Right.
In this world that's clearly being reshaped by AI so rapidly?
Yeah, well, he says education has to change.
Okay.
He talks a lot about moving away from rote memorization and towards things like critical thinking, creativity, problem-solving, adaptability, all those things that are harder to automate.
Right.
And that are going to be valuable in a world where the ability to learn continuously and adapt to new situations is going to be paramount.
So it's almost like we need a whole new definition of what it means to be educated in the 21st century.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
It's not just about memorizing facts anymore.
It's not about just what you know.
Right.
It's about how you learn, how you adapt.
And he seems to embody that himself. I mean, this is a guy who's constantly, pushing himself outside of his comfort zone.
Totally. Throughout all these interviews, we get these little glimpses into his personality, his leadership style, and kind of his personal philosophy.
Yeah.
And he really does seem to embody this idea of constant growth and evolution.
Yeah, and he's not afraid to surround himself with people who are smarter than him, which I think is a really good lesson for anyone in a leadership position.
Totally. It's that humility combined with ambition.
Yeah.
It's so striking.
He wants to do big things, but he also recognizes that he doesn't have all the answers.
Exactly. And he's willing to listen and learn from others, even people who disagree with him.
And he really seems to believe that we can solve some of these huge global problems using AI.
He does, and it's not just talk.
Right.
He's investing in companies working on everything from climate change and renewable energy to advancements in healthcare and education.
Pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
What's his take on the whole AI going rogue scenario that everyone's so worried about?
He doesn't dismiss it.
Okay.
But he also really stresses that we have a choice in how this technology develops.
Okay.
It's not inevitable that it's going to turn into some existential threat.
Right.
We have the power and the responsibility to shape it.
So it's not about stopping progress.
Right.
No, it's about steering it.
Exactly. And he's not naive about how hard that's going to be.
Right.
He talks about the need for strong ethical guidelines for really careful planning and oversight, and for this ongoing dialogue between the folks who are building these systems, policymakers, and the public.
It's the collaboration aspect of it that I find really encouraging. He's not saying leave it to the experts, we've got this.
Right.
He's saying this is a conversation we all need to be a part of, because the future of AI is the future of humanity.
Yeah. Exactly.
A pretty profound statement when you think about it.
It is, and it's where his message goes from being about technology to something much bigger. He's asking us to think deeply about the kind of world we want to live in, the kind of future we want to create for ourselves and for our kids.
And he's challenging us to not just let it happen.
Right.
To actually step up and play a role.
Be proactive.
And one thing I find helpful is that he takes these really complicated concepts.
Yeah.
And he kind of grounds them in these really tangible examples.
He really does. You underlined that bit in one of the articles about OpenAI's approach to AI safety.
Yeah.
Where he talks about the need for what he calls scalable oversight.
Right.
So as these systems get more and more powerful, how do we make sure we don't just lose the ability to even understand what they're doing, let alone control them.
Okay, scalable oversight.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like a massive challenge. Where do you even begin with that?
He says, look, we can actually learn from how we've dealt with other powerful technologies.
Okay.
He uses the example of nuclear energy. Like, here's a technology that clearly has the potential for huge benefits,
Right.
but also huge risks.
Yep.
And over time, we've developed, international treaties, safety protocols, regulatory bodies to try to manage that.
So he's not saying we should just throw our hands up in the air and hope for the best.
No.
He actually thinks there are frameworks and things we can learn from other industries.
Yeah. And it's not just about preventing the worst case scenario. It's
Right.
about proactively shaping the development of AI in a way that aligns with what we care about.
Right. And it gets back to that question of who decides what those values are?
Exactly.
Because it's a global conversation we need to have.
Totally. And he's really insistent on that point about who gets to be at the table for that conversation.
Yeah.
And it's not just, the tech leaders or the folks in government.
Right. It's got to be broader than that.
Yeah, it's got to include ethicists, philosophers, social scientists, artists, everyday people.
Yeah, people from all walks of life, really.
From all over the world, because the impacts are going to be global.
Exactly. And it's going to impact everybody, so everybody should have a say.
Exactly. And I think he really believes that everyone has something valuable to bring to that conversation.
It's a big responsibility, though. And I think a lot of people hearing this might feel a little overwhelmed.
Sure.
Or even powerless.
Yeah.
When they think about the scale of all this.
I get that.
What can I possibly do?
Right. But I don't think his message is meant to be paralyzing.
Right.
It's actually meant to be empowering.
Okay.
He's saying, yes, the challenges are huge, but so are the opportunities.
Yeah.
We're not just passive bystanders here.
Yeah.
We actually have agency. We have a voice.
Okay.
And we have real power to shape how this unfolds.
That's a good point. It's almost like he's not just predicting the future. He's inviting us to create it with him.
He is, and he's really clear that it's not some predetermined thing.
Right.
It's a path that we forge.
With every choice we make.
Exactly, with every decision, with every action we take.
Right.
So let's make sure we're heading in a direction that's good for everybody.
So where do we go from here? What are some things that people listening can actually do?
Well, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Exploring these ideas. Don't be afraid to get into the weeds a little bit.
Yeah.
To challenge your own assumptions, to seek out different viewpoints.
Talk to people.
Exactly. Have conversations with people who disagree with you.
Yeah.
This is how we figure this out.
It's it's a fascinating moment to be alive.
It is.
And a little scary.
Yeah.
But mostly exciting, I think.
I think so, too. And I think that's really the message that Sam Altman is trying to get across.
Yeah, there are challenges, but we can do this.
We can do this.
Awesome. Well, this has been a fascinating dive.
Yeah, this is great.
Really appreciate your insights.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to everyone listening out there. We will see you next time for another deep dive.